Hi, I'm Rachel Mills, and I'll be discussing my fermented pineapple lab experiment that I did at home for my class Food Science 417. The fermented pineapple experiment that I did was the tepache drink. The tepache drink consists of brown sugar and fermented pineapple over a course of 3 to 4 days. Tepache drink is very much known in the Mexican culture and is used widely. I followed along with a recipe that used the pineapple rinds, brown sugar, and water. The fermentation consisted of 3 to 4 days, and in the following videos, I will be going over what my process was like and how the recipe turned out. The overall fermentation decreased of the pH value of 7 to 4.5. Here's the process. First, I was going to prepare the pineapple. You have to cut all the ends off and store the fruit, and then store the fruit rinds for later and save that for the fermentation. The cut up pineapple can be used for later when it needs to be used for garnishing. Here's the pineapple rind that I was used, and I will put in my cup later. Here's me just finishing up cutting up the pineapple. I'm going to discard of the main fruit part and save the rest of the rinds. Now it is time to prep the fermentation lab and use all my materials and make sure they are sterile and sanitized. First, I'm going to take my pineapple rind and put it in my 1 gallon bell jar. Place all of them in there first. Once I get them all in, it is ready to go on to the next steps. The recipe called for brown sugar inside of the ferment tank, so that is what I did. Added 1 cup of brown sugar to the pineapple rind. Next, I add 10 cups of water. The recipe called for 2 to 8, so I'm just slowly measuring them out. Fast forward, I finally get to my last couple cups of water here as the fermentation is almost ready to start. Once the last cup of water is added, it is ready to move on to the fermentation weight. Since I was in quarantine, I unfortunately had to make my own out of rocks. Next, we put our clean cloth over it to make sure it can aerate properly and be ready for the 4-day fermentation, and it is ready to go. Now we will come back and check it every day and record the pH. Okay, here it is on the first day, 24 hours later, ready to go. 24 hours later, I come back and I'm testing the pH. The pH started at 7 neutral, so here we will examine what the pH is now. After 24 hours, the pH was at 6.0. This was measured using pH strips and the pH scale to match accordingly. These were taken at exactly 24 hours apart. Alright, now we have fermented for 2 days. Coming back 48 hours later and checking in on our fermentation, it is really heavy, I have come to find, and smells a little bit. We're going to test the pH again. This time pH is at a 5. As I measure it and scale it out, the pH is consistently decreasing, which is a good sign, meaning the fermentation is actively happening. Alright, 3rd day of the fermentation. Here we are. On the 3rd day, the pH is at a 4.5 here, which is also a good sign. The pH is still decreasing, meaning the fermentation is actively in process. Using the pH strips again, I'm able to measure this. On the last day of our fermentation, day 4, Here we go. Still smells really heavy again. And I'm going to take the pH strips again and measure it out. Obviously, it's beginning to smell a little bit. After I measure it and scale it, the final pH is at a 4.5. So we are done with our fermentation, and it is time to move into the prep for the recipe. First, I'm gonna go ahead and strain everything out of the fermentation vessel, and I'm just going to use the liquid for my recipe. This smelled really bad. All right, time for actual testing it. It's a really easy drink to make, and it was actually really good too. So I'm going to take my cup of ice, take some of the fermented pineapple that I was storing, scoop it a little bit, and give it a try. It's actually really good too. Once again, just having another sip of it, trying it again. But this was a super easy fermentation and created a really easy and simple recipe that I will definitely be using again in the future. I added some lime on top of it this time and some ice, and I think it could also be added with some other stuff too. That is it for my wild fermentation lab. Thank you for watching.